Okay, we got Ashton Branch's 06 truck here. This is a truck that's back halved, it's a long bed, and it's a relatively new setup. It's an older build that they kind of did a bunch of work to and refreshed everything. And he wants to get the thing dialed in on the dyno. It's a 20 over 5.9, has 300% over S&S injectors, 14 mil S&S single CP3, a forced inductions 482 single turbo. And then he also has 2 kits of nitrous. We're probably not going to use a lot of nitrous on the dyno today because it is a stock block 5.9. And ideally, he wants to run 590, hopefully, if we can't make enough power safely on the 5.9. And then he'll maybe just run 670. But as long as he can get a good 60 foot, I think at 4,500 pounds, we shouldn't be able to have a problem making enough power to run 590 in this truck. We're going to run this thing on the dyno. I added a 10 bar map sensor to it so that we can get nice scaling through launch, and then we'll also probably do launch control so you can have a launch limiter as well. Okay, after a couple passes on the dyno, we noticed that as soon as it came on boost, it was going through torque converter lockup. So there's a problem with the lockup circuit, or there's a problem with the converter itself. So they ended up leaving the truck here, and we're going to pull the trans and just go through it, make sure everything's all right inside the trans and the valve body, and send the converter out for a cut and clean and have it fresh, go back in. Then it goes on the dyno, and while it's here, we're also going to pin the ECM for a staging limiter and hook up manual overdrive and lockup switches. Currently it was through the nitrous controller, and we were having some problems with it on the dyno. So we're just going to hook up some manual gauges and get this thing ready to where they can take it to the track and know that it's ready to make some passes. We've got Ashton Branch's truck back on the dyno since fixing the transmission. This had an old Suncoast setup in it with the Omega shaft. Those things had some problems with the stator tube that they had used, but we ended up getting the converter refreshed, and we went back in with the Suncoast Omega shaft, but we changed the stator around, and everything seems to be working correctly. We got the manual lockup and overdrive switches in. Line pressure's doing great. Everything seems good. So from the last time it was on the dyno, it made 763 horsepower just going straight through torque converter lockup. So that was pretty much all on fluid coupling, and now just getting the lockup to actually work correctly, it made 1,114 horsepower. All we did was fix the lockup issue in the truck. So that tells you how much can go through your torque converter lockup if you have a loose torque converter. And when you grab that lockup switch, you're adding, 500, almost 400 horsepower to your input shaft. That's why guys twist their input shaft in half when they grab lockup all day, every day, because their input shaft is spinning, and lockup comes in and it wants to twist that thing in half. So we've got a good runner today. We're pretty much maxed out on the 12 mil pump. We're like this 300% overs and a 12 mil from S&S, and we're at 1,300 microseconds, and rail pressure is pulling down to like 25,000 psi, and I'm commanding 28. So I'm going to dial in the staging limiter, and I'm going to dial in boost limited fueling, get everything working to where they can come pick up this truck. It's ready to go to the drag strip and make some passes. Okay, we made 1,155 horsepower, but we were still noticing rail pressure fluctuations. It was really irregular. So I pulled the stock relief valve off, put a 2200 bar extra G relief valve in it, and the next run after that, rail pressure was nice and smooth, and it did 1,222 horsepower. And so now what I see is the wastegate is blowing open. We're going to put boost to the top of the wastegate, blow the wastegate shut, hopefully makes an extra 5 to 6 pounds of boost. If it does that, it should pick up 20-25 horsepower. We're really looking for 1,250 horsepower on fuel. That's where they want to be. Then they can take the boost pressure off the top of the wastegate if they want to add 2 kits of nitrous and make a big number. That way the wastegate can open, keep the turbo from overspeeding. So let's give this a shot. So we took this port out and added boost, and you can see this is just a temporary line. We took a nitrous jet out and ran boost to here, this will blow the wastegate puck shut and not allow the wastegate open. The main reason we're doing this is because it is still on fuel. We are not using nitrous. We don't really need the wastegate at 1220 horsepower with a big turbo like this, and I think we can get an extra 5 or 6 pounds of boost out of it by blowing the wastegate shut. That should make more power. Alright, adding boost to the wastegate, closing the wastegate, really made very little difference on boost. It was within 1 psi, and our horsepower, we only gained 4 horsepower. So that tells me it's not really worth going to the bother of blowing the gate shut. We're going to leave it the way it was. That way it's protected. If they ever turn a kit of nitrous on, it's going to blow the gate open, keep from overspeeding the turbo. So we're going to finish the day out. I turned the fuel up another 100 microseconds. We made 1236 horsepower. It's pretty much everything we can get out of it on fuel. I know if we'd add nitrous, it would pick up a good bit. So we're gonna get this thing off the dyno, and this thing's ready to go. They've got a staging limiter, and everything's ready to go to the racetrack and see if we can make some laps on it. Here you can see where we put our staging limiter. So when you go to launch the truck, all he's gonna do is slide his foot up on the brake pedal, and when he pushes that button, he can have his foot flat on the floor, and it's only going to go to the RPM that I have this button set to. And when you launch, all you do is throw your foot and you're on 100% throttle. So this just engages the staging limiter, and when you let off the button, it jumps to the tune file that you were on before.